There is a kind of change that does not happen outside. It doesn't appear on social media. People around you may not notice it, and often, you cannot even explain when it began. It was not an event. It was not a dramatic revelation. In fact, it may have started on an ordinary day, perhaps while walking, perhaps during a conversation, perhaps in a quiet moment when nothing special was happening, and suddenly, something shifted. Not in the world, but in the way you experience it. The same people continue talking, the same routines continue repeating, life looks exactly the same, yet inside you, something feels different. Something that once felt solid begins to lose its certainty. You start noticing small details. Conversations sound automatic. Emotional reactions appear predictable. Situations that once affected you deeply no longer carry the same weight, and this can feel confusing because nothing external explains the change. You are still the same person, and yet, you are not. You may have asked yourself, why do I feel different when everything looks the same? That question often marks the beginning of awakening, because awakening rarely begins as enlightenment. It begins as displacement, as if you step slightly back inside your own mind, and for the first time, you are observing your experience. You notice thoughts arising without immediately believing them. You watch emotions passing without being completely pulled into them. A new space appears, an inner silence, and this silence is not emptiness, it is presence. You begin to see how much of life operated on autopilot. How many beliefs were adopted unconsciously, how many choices were made just to belong, how many actions came from fear rather than awareness, and this realization does not bring only clarity, it brings unfamiliarity. Because when awareness begins to awaken, the old identity starts losing stability. Familiar places feel different. Fast environments feel exhausting. Old motivations lose their intensity. You may feel an unexpected need for silence. Not because of sadness, but because something inside you is reorganizing. Many people misunderstand this stage. They believe something is wrong. They think they lost motivation, that they became too sensitive, that they are disconnecting from life. But something deeper is happening. You are beginning to perceive without filters, to perceive without automatic reactions, to realize that the mind is not who you thought you were. And once that realization begins, everything changes. Because observing the mind means you are no longer completely controlled by it. A paradox appears. A quiet peace begins emerging, yet at the same time, you may feel less connected to old ways of living. Conversations may feel superficial. Old ambitions lose their intensity. Chasing the same goals no longer feels meaningful, and doubt may arise. Am I losing something? Am I changing too much? Why do I feel different from others? But perhaps you are not moving away from life. Perhaps you are moving closer to yourself for the first time. Awakening is not leaving the world. It is seeing it without unconscious layers. And once this begins, something irreversible happens. Time feels different. Moments become more vivid. Emotions become observable. Urgency loses its grip. And a quiet question emerges. If I am not my thoughts, who am I? This question does not demand an immediate answer. It opens a journey, a deeply personal journey. Many people experience without fully understanding, and perhaps that is what brought you here. Perhaps something inside you recognizes this process. Something more aware, more present, more awake. And in this video we will explore what truly begins to change inside you after awakening starts. Because there is a phase of awakening almost nobody talks about. A silent phase, an inner transformation. A moment where life looks the same on the outside, but your experience of existence will never be the same again. And if you are still watching, you may already be living this transformation. After awakening begins, something subtle starts happening, and most people do not notice it immediately. It is not an external change. It is a shift in how you experience yourself living. You may still participate in the same situations, yet you no longer feel completely inside them. It is as if a part of you has stepped back and is observing your reactions, observing emotions arising, observing thoughts appearing. And for the first time, you notice something strange. You do not control thoughts the way you once believed. They simply appear. Ideas arise, memories arise, concerns arise, and a question begins forming. If I did not choose this thought, who is thinking? This question marks a silent turning point, because throughout life we are taught that we are the mind. But awakening reveals something different. There is you, and there is what you observe. That separation transforms the experience of being alive. You may notice moments when time feels slower, moments where emotions arise without immediately controlling you, where reactions pause before happening. Within that pause, awareness appears, and inside awareness, freedom begins. But this freedom can feel disorienting. because awareness exposes how much of life was automatic. You begin recognizing patterns, repeated conversations, repeated conflicts, repeated emotional cycles. You see how many people live inside mental narratives they never questioned, and something inside you can no longer fully participate the same way. You may feel slightly out of place, not superior, not disconnected, just different, like watching a play that once felt completely real. You are still present, yet perception has changed. Then something unexpected happens. You begin losing interest in certain things, not from lack of motivation, but because they no longer resonate internally. Goals that once felt urgent lose intensity. Arguments feel unnecessary. The need to prove yourself slowly fades. And this can feel unsettling. The mind interprets it as loss. Am I becoming distant? Am I losing ambition? Am I becoming indifferent? But something deeper is happening. You are no longer building identity through external validation. For years, identity may have been shaped by acceptance, approval, recognition, belonging. Now something within you begins to stand on its own, effortlessly, quietly, and with that comes heightened sensitivity. You start feeling environments energetically. You sense authenticity. You sense misalignment. Silence becomes more valuable than stimulation. Presence becomes more meaningful than distraction. Depth becomes more important than quantity. And this transforms your relationship with reality. Because awakening does not only change who you are, it changes what you perceive as real. You begin noticing social patterns. How many people move through life without questioning direction? How many choices are made from fear of exclusion? How many identities were built for survival, not authenticity? At this stage, a very specific feeling emerges. A mixture of clarity and solitude, not physical loneliness, but the sense that few people understand what is happening internally. You may try to explain it, and find no words. Because awakening is not intellectual, it is experiential. It feels like waking up inside your own life, and realizing that many are still dreaming. This may bring moments of deep silence, moments where a new question arises. What truly matters now? And this question changes everything. It does not come from conditioning, it comes from emerging awareness. You begin realizing you do not need to react to everything. You do not need to prove anything. You do not need constant movement. And for the first time, simply existing feels enough. Not perfect, not complete, but real. Perhaps the deepest change is this. You begin trusting inner experience more than external expectations. Inner guidance becomes noticeable, not as words, but as quiet knowing, a subtle alignment. And the more you listen, the harder it becomes to ignore who you truly are. Awakening does not add something new. It removes layers of conditioning, fear, automatic identification, until something simple remains. Presence, awareness, being. And if you recognize these experiences, you may not be trying to understand awakening anymore. You may already be living it. As awakening begins integrating, one of the most unexpected changes appears, and almost nobody prepares you for it. It does not begin in your thoughts, it begins in your relationships. Suddenly, some connections start changing, not because of conflict, not because of conscious decisions, not because someone did something wrong. They simply stop flowing the same way. Conversations that once lasted hours feel shorter. Topics that once bonded you feel empty. And you notice something difficult to explain. You still care about people, yet you cannot be present in the same way anymore. Perhaps you have felt this. You sit with someone, listening, responding, but a quiet part of you observes everything, as if something shifted internally, as if the connection belonged to a previous version of you. Many relationships are built on shared identity, shared fears, shared expectations, shared reactions, shared stories. But when identity begins to change, the invisible foundation of relationships changes too. And this does not mean something went wrong, it means something evolved. Awakening reorganizes inner priorities. You begin seeking depth where you once accepted surface interaction. Not from judgment, but because your inner system no longer resonates there. Then something delicate happens. Some people begin drifting away. Sometimes slowly, sometimes silently, sometimes without conflict at all. Messages decrease. Invitations stop. Conversations fade. And this can hurt. Because awakening does not only remove illusions, it reveals which connections depended on your former identity. Many interpret this phase as loss, but perhaps it is alignment. When consciousness shifts, relational frequency shifts as well. It is not superiority, it is not intentional separation, it is resonance. You begin noticing who can meet you in silence, and who needed your old reactions to relate to you. This stage can feel lonely at first. Because awakening reshapes not only the inner world, but the social field around you. You may try returning to who you were, laughing the same way, participating the same way, Yet something inside cannot pretend anymore, not from arrogance, but because awareness cannot return to unconsciousness. Then a deeply human phase begins. You wonder, am I isolating myself? Am I becoming distant? Am I losing important people? But perhaps the real question is, who remains when I stop performing roles? Many relationships were sustained by conditioned versions of you, the peacemaker, the entertainer, the agreeable one, the problem solver. As those roles dissolve, some relationships no longer recognize you, and silence appears. An external silence reflecting inner reorganization. You begin realizing something profound. True connection requires no effort. It happens naturally, without proving, without explaining, without convincing. New people may appear, fewer but different, calmer conversations, deeper presence, less performance, and something unexpected happens. Quantity decreases, but quality expands. Awakening does not enlarge your social circle, it deepens relational experience. You begin valuing presence over stimulation, silence over noise, truth over approval. Then something even subtler emerges. You begin feeling comfortable alone, not alone from lack, but alone from completeness. This is an invisible milestone of awakening. For the first time, your inner company becomes enough. Loneliness transforms into space, space to perceive, to breathe, to exist without roles, and within that space, something new begins forming. A different kind of peace, a peace independent of external circumstances, a calm that arises not because life became perfect, but because you no longer need the world to confirm who you are. And that peace is the next stage of the journey, because after relationships shift, after noise fades, an unexpected stillness appears within you. A strange peace, almost unfamiliar, and that is exactly where we go next. After awakening begins, and after relationships start shifting, something unexpected emerges within you. It is not excitement, not intense happiness, not emotional highs. It is something far quieter, a strange peace, a calm that seems to come from nowhere. You may have noticed it without knowing how to describe it. Moments where nothing extraordinary is happening, yet an inner stability is present, as if something inside has slowed down, as if the urgency of life has softened. At first, this can feel confusing, because we were taught to associate peace with achievement, with goals accomplished, problems solved, perfect circumstances, but this calm does not depend on any of that. It appears even while life remains imperfect, even when challenges exist, even when the future is uncertain, and precisely because of this, it feels mysterious. You begin noticing subtle changes. Silence no longer feels uncomfortable. Before silence needed filling with music, conversation, distraction, constant activity. Now, silence feels alive. You notice the wind, your breathing, the presence of your body, and something inside finally rests. Not because everything is fixed, but because resistance begins dissolving. You may notice this during simple moments. Walking alone, watching the sky, sitting without doing anything, and for the first time, there is no urgent need to escape the present moment. Awakening initiates an invisible shift. The mind stops being the center of experience. For most of life, the mind controlled perception, interpreting everything, creating stories, predicting threats, replaying the past. But when awareness stabilizes, something changes. Thoughts still appear, but they lose authority. They pass like clouds moving through the sky, and you realize something deeply liberating. You do not have to follow every thought. You do not have to react to every emotion. Between stimulus and response, space appears, and within that space, peace is born. This strange peace does not come from control. It arises from the absence of compulsive control. Situations that once triggered anxiety no longer carry the same intensity. Arguments lose importance. The need to prove yourself fades. The need to convince others dissolves. You begin recognizing something essential. Much suffering came from resistance. Resistance to reality. Resistance to emotions. Resistance to uncertainty. When resistance softens, energy once used to fight life becomes presence. It feels as if the nervous system finally receives permission to rest. Many people find this unfamiliar, because they lived for years in constant alertness. The body adapted to tension, the mind adapted to noise. So when calm arrives, it feels almost wrong. Some wonder, did I lose motivation? Am I becoming indifferent? Is something missing? But this is not apathy, it is regulation. Awakening reorganizes the internal system. You move from survival into presence. In survival, everything feels urgent. In presence, everything becomes observable. You begin experiencing moments where simply being is enough. No need to improve the moment, no need to escape it, no need to transform it. Then something curious happens. Time changes. Not externally, but perceptually. Moments feel wider, days feel deeper. You notice details once invisible. Light shifting, distant sounds, subtle sensations. Awareness expands. The mind slows because it no longer needs to predict danger constantly. And within this state, a different intelligence emerges. Not thinking-based, but awareness-based. You begin knowing what to do, without overthinking. Decisions feel natural. Action arises from clarity instead of anxiety. This is one of awakening's quiet transformations. Life is no longer guided solely by analytical thought. It begins flowing through presence itself. And as trust deepens, peace stabilizes. It is not dramatic, not exciting, not attention-seeking. It simply exists, steady, quiet, reliable. Perhaps for the first time, you realize you do not need to chase happiness, because something deeper than happiness appears. In a home, a feeling of being at peace within yourself. And when this peace stabilizes, another unexpected phase emerges, because alongside peace comes a feeling many do not anticipate, a sense of emptiness, not negative emptiness, but open space. And inside that space, the next stage of awakening begins. There is a stage of awakening that almost no one explains accurately. Up to this point, awakening felt like discovery. You began noticing thoughts, observing emotions, feeling a new presence within yourself. But eventually awakening stops feeling like illumination, and begins feeling like dismantling. Not external dismantling, internal dismantling, quiet, deep, irreversible. You begin sensing something extremely subtle. It is not only your view of reality that changed, the mechanism through which you existed has changed. Before, experience operated through reaction. Something happened gives you reacted. Someone spoke gives you responded. An emotion arose gives you became that emotion. Now a gap appears. An invisible space, between stimulus and response, between thought and identification, between emotion and identity. Within that space, something entirely new emerges. Perceptual freedom. You discover you can feel without being consumed, think without immediately believing, experience without needing control. This shift is far greater than it seems. For the first time in your life, consciousness stops operating automatically. For years, perhaps your entire life, the mind functioned as a survival system. It categorized reality instantly, safe or dangerous, approval or rejection, success or failure. Everything existed to protect identity. But awakening reveals something unsettling. Identity was never fixed. It was a process, a psychological habit, a continuous construction. And when this becomes clear, something inside relaxes. The constant need to defend an image weakens. You no longer feel compelled to convince others, or even convince yourself. Situations that once triggered anxiety now pass more lightly. Arguments lose personal intensity. Silence becomes comfortable. Then another experience arises, often misunderstood, a sense of emptiness. But this emptiness is not absence, it is space. Space where mental noise once existed. Space where effort to maintain identity once consumed energy. You begin realizing how much energy was used sustaining a personal narrative. As that narrative loosens, energy returns, not as excitement, but as calm presence. Time begins to feel different. Simple moments expand. Walking wind, moving through space. Light changing throughout the day. Experience becomes direct rather than filtered. And here a profound shift occurs. The center of identity moves. Before, you were the character in the story. Now you begin recognizing the observer of the story. And this recognition changes everything. Because the observer does not struggle to exist. It simply is. Thoughts continue. Emotions arise. Life unfolds. But something fundamental has changed. You are no longer completely inside psychological movement. You are aware of it. This awareness initiates deep nervous system reorganization. Old defensive patterns soften. Fear loses intensity, not because the world became safe, but because identity no longer depends on constant mental protection. Many people interpret this stage as loss of motivation. In truth, motivation driven by fear begins dissolving. The need for validation fades. Competition loses urgency. External approval becomes less compelling. In its place arises something new. Action without tension, movement without anxiety, participation without attachment. You continue living, but control becomes unnecessary. Life flows more naturally when resistance diminishes. Trust shifts from mental narrative to direct experience. More presence, less anticipation, and slowly, the fundamental fear begins dissolving. The fear of not being enough, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of losing control. Because you begin realizing the awareness observing everything was never threatened. It has always been intact, always present, always quietly aware. Awakening reveals its true nature. Nothing new is added to you. What was never truly you is simply falling away. And as this happens, you stop trying to become someone, and begin discovering what it means simply to be. There comes a stage in awakening where something extraordinarily subtle begins to unfold. It is not dramatic, not mystical, not overwhelming. In fact, it almost goes unnoticed. Yet this stage marks one of the most profound transformations of the entire awakening process. After questioning reality, after the feeling of inner disorientation, after old identities begin dissolving, something new emerges, an intelligence that does not originate from thought. You begin noticing decisions arising effortlessly, without overthinking, without internal debate, without mental exhaustion. Previously, choosing felt heavy. The mind analyzed endlessly, compared possibilities, simulated outcomes, tried to predict safety. Now something entirely different occurs. You simply know, not emotionally, not impulsively, but quietly. A direct clarity appears, as if an inner guidance system had always existed beneath mental noise. You may notice this in small moments. Speaking naturally, without rehearsing, leaving situations when something feels complete, recognizing alignment without needing logical explanation. This can feel unfamiliar, because society trained you to believe intelligence equals thinking more. But awakening reveals a radical insight. Thinking is not the highest form of knowing. There exists a deeper intelligence, preconceptual awareness. It does not argue, it does not pressure, it does not persuade, it simply indicates. And as trust in this inner intelligence grows, your relationship with life transforms. You begin realizing many past conflicts came from acting against this silent knowing, saying yes when you're being felt no, remaining in situations requiring constant effort, trying to control outcomes driven by fear. Now listening changes. You begin sensing energy rather than only interpreting information. You feel environments before analyzing them. You sense authenticity. You notice tension. You recognize presence beyond words, not judgment, perception. Simultaneously, another shift occurs. Less need for opinions. Previously, the mind needed conclusions. Agree or disagree. Like or dislike. Accept or reject. Now you discover many experiences require no mental closure. They can simply be lived. This creates a new freedom. Freedom from automatic reaction. Freedom from compulsive interpretation. Freedom to remain present without forcing experience into identity. Gradually, internal priorities reorganize. Urgency fades. Comparison weakens. External validation loses importance. Something deeper begins guiding movement. Not passivity, alignment. Action arises naturally. Silence becomes natural. Movement happens without inner conflict. Perhaps the most surprising realization emerges here. Life begins responding differently, not because reality changed, but because unconscious resistance decreased. Situations resolve more easily. Conversations flow naturally. Opportunities appear without struggle. For years the mind believed survival required control, planning every outcome, avoiding every mistake, managing every variable. Awakening reveals another truth. Consciousness does not control life. It participates in life. And as participation replaces resistance, a greater intelligence becomes visible, not external, not mystical, but inherent to existence itself. You begin noticing synchronicities, meaningful timing, unexpected meetings, answers appearing without searching, not magical events. Natural coherence revealed once mental noise quiets. Here, a profound transformation occurs. Trust without certainty. Trust not based on guaranteed outcomes, but grounded in direct awareness. You realize you do not need complete understanding to feel safe. Presence itself becomes stability. The unknown no longer feels threatening. It feels open, alive. A living field through which consciousness continues discovering itself. Many describe this phase as a strange peace. Not constant happiness, but deep inner stability. Even when emotions arise, even when uncertainty appears, something remains untouched, observing, aware, present. You begin recognizing. This presence was never created, it was never achieved, it was always here. Before thoughts, before identity, before story. Awakening is simply remembering what never disappeared, and as this recognition deepens, Life stops being an attempt to become someone. It becomes consciousness expressing itself through experience. Perhaps now, as this video approaches its end, you are noticing something difficult to describe. Not exactly an emotion, not exactly a thought, more like a quiet feeling. That something inside you shifted while watching, because awakening rarely arrives dramatically. It does not come as an explosion, it comes as recognition, as if a part of you had simply been waiting to be remembered. For a long time you may have lived trying to adapt to the world, trying to meet expectations, trying to follow paths that seemed correct, trying to become someone you believed you needed to be, without realizing. You built an identity based on survival, a necessary identity, but not your final one. Then something began to change, not outside, inside. You started observing more, reacting less, feeling more deeply, yet attaching less to emotions. You noticed thoughts appearing, without needing to obey them. You noticed emotions arising, without defining yourself through them. And perhaps for the first time, you experienced a different kind of freedom. Not the freedom of controlling life, but the freedom of not needing to control it. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of awakening. Awakening does not add something new to you. It removes what was never essential. Noise fades. Rigid identities soften. The constant need to prove yourself dissolves. And when that happens, a new relationship with life emerges. You begin noticing small things again. The silence between sounds. The space between thoughts. The presence hidden inside ordinary moments. Time feels slower. Experiences feel deeper. Life becomes more vivid. Externally, everything may remain the same, yet internally, everything feels different. You may still have the same responsibilities, the same challenges, the same environment, but one essential shift has happened. You are no longer completely lost inside the mind. There is an observer present. And when the observer awakens, reality stops being something happening to you. It becomes something you consciously witness, and that changes everything. Suffering loses rigidity. Mental stories lose authority. Fear becomes recognizable as temporary movement within awareness. Slowly, without effort, a new inner stability emerges. Not constant happiness, but quiet peace, a subtle trust. As if life no longer needs to be solved immediately. As if simply being here is enough. Breathing, observing, living. Many people experience a paradox at this stage. Everything feels more uncertain, yet more real. You begin allowing the unknown. You no longer need complete certainty, because trust shifts inward. And this is where the real journey begins. Awakening was never the destination. It is the beginning of learning how to live differently. Identity reorganizes, meaning evolves. Purpose becomes quieter, yet deeper. Perhaps the most important question is no longer, what should I do now, but, who am I becoming without realizing it? If something in this video resonated deeply, if parts of it felt strangely familiar, you may already be entering the next phase. After awakening, many people experience something rarely explained. They no longer feel like the same person. Old identities begin fading, old interests shift, relationships transform, and confusion may arise, not because something is wrong, but because a new self is emerging. And this is exactly what we will explore in the next chapter, why you no longer feel like the same person. Before you continue, pause for a moment. Notice how you feel right now, without analysis, without interpretation. Just notice, then write in the comments one single word that describes your inner state. Many people discover something powerful through this simple act. They realize they are not alone. Awakening is not separation. It is reconnection. Reconnection with yourself. Reconnection with life. Reconnection with awareness itself. If this video met you at the right moment, consider continuing this journey with us. This channel is not here to teach you something new. It is here to recognize something already unfolding within you. And the journey is only beginning. Thank you for being here. Gratitude for being here. Much light on your path. Quantum silence.